Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. The paranormal theory that I find the most convincing is the idea of a lost civilization, or at least a variant on that. Now, of course, when I say this, everybody's minds immediately jumps to Atlantis. Now, I partly believe in the story of Atlantis. I just don't think it was on the scale that Plato wrote. I don't believe that was one of the local islands either, but even taking Plato at his word, it was Egyptian priests talking to a highly educated but still non native speaker and then passing his notes down to his grandson or great grandson, whatever it is, who eventually turned out to be Plato and who wrote his account of Atlantis. We've all played the telephone game as children. And messages, even when they're written down, are distorted to say nothing about different language, different culture, and different generations. Was there a flood? Almost for sure. The Bosphorus Strait was a land barrier between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. When the Ice Age started melting through erosion, that range, that plateau, whatever you want to call it, gave way, and the Mediterranean, the Black Sea became one. There's, well, we know for sure the old Black Sea was freshwater, and people love to build settlements beside freshwater. It's good for fishing, it's good for drinking, it's good for all that. So if the Black Sea was filled up by brackish, salty water and the people had to move, it's very possible they would have passed down that record as an oral tradition. Again, this is around the 12,000 year ago cycle, and the beginnings of language that we know of didn't begin till about 8,000 to 6,000 years ago. So there's a lot of time for traditions to change. That being said, I think that's the answer. We have Mesopotamia, who for many years they thought Sumeria was the first civilization, and it just fully formed out of the blue. That's actually a quote used by a certain archaeologist. But you know what? Our knowledge got better. We studied, and the language that we thought was fully formed and developed and just started turned out to be linked to a record keeping system. So the Mesopotamians went from the very practical idea of keeping track of how many sheep and bundles of wheat and barrels of wine or whatever, amphora. I actually don't know how Mesopotamians drank wine. I know they did, but that's all I know at the present time. And being able to write that down as a shorthand gave you the power of the gods. You have immortal records of what trade happened when. So if somebody owes something, they can come back and say, hey, here's the tablet. You rolled your signet ring, which is essentially your signature, and you agreed you'd pay back the difference. Then somebody got the idea to do funerary inscriptions because keeping track of births and deaths is an important job for any government. If lots of people are passing away, it's worth a royal inquiry. If a lot of people are being born, you can expand the army, you can do all sorts of things. And over about 2,000 years, it went from this record keeping system to a modern language where you can tell stories, you can communicate, negotiate, all written down. So the records and terms are finalized, and every language does this. We know language evolved independently three times: China, Mesopotamia, and Mesoamerica. There may be other sources. And indeed, there probably are. Just looking at the alphabet. We don't use the Sumerian alphabet today. We use a weird derivative of it. But people basically made up their own variations on other people's alphabets. In the modern day, we use the Roman alphabet because it doesn't seem like the Celts had an alphabet of their own. But back to the beginning of this, Atlantis probably was a significant power. The Mediterranean has been able to produce powerful city-states literally going back forever. The island of Cyprus was once the home of the Minoan kings. I might have it wrong with Cyprus, but in that area. And their civilization was incredibly powerful for a long time, till a volcano wiped it out. But there would be more and more civilizations. At one point, people didn't believe in all that. They had records dating back to the Roman Republic. And through that, there were inferences to Greek, because the educated people in Italy were speaking Greek, just as we would use Latin today. They had no idea about the non-biblical Hittites, the Hattis, as they're usually called, who were in Turkey, Anatolia. There's a whole civilization there to be discovered. And it's not the only one. Angkor Wat, lost city. Machu Picchu, lost just a few hundred years ago, but found and restored within the past 100. Well, from the 1800s anyway. We have seen cities get lost and found again. So are we to believe the only cities in the world in the beginning were Çatalhöyük and the very bases of Jericho? Both of them go back around 10,000 years. We only know about them because they were made of stone. Most people don't use stone. They use sod, they use mud bricks, they use wood. To construct something of stone requires a massive amount of technology and organization. If you don't have easy to carve rock, something like limestone, and limestone wouldn't survive, but we're running around with copper tools at this point. The Bronze Age hasn't even started, to say nothing of the Iron Age. And it's very difficult to cut into rock, as I'm sure most people at some point have tried. So if there was a civilization, it could have been highly organized, but given the technical limitations, it would inherently be vulnerable to any catastrophe. And since writing didn't exist, the only remembrance of that city and their kings would be through their tales. Now, the Egyptians and the Sumerians shared the idea of kings in the golden era. This would eventually come up in Greece, but a little bit differently. And when they came up with these kings and queens, although there's not many queens in there, they gave them ridiculously long lifespans. So-and-so was born to so-and-so, and he reigned 14,000 years, and then he gave birth to so-and-so, and so-and-so was born to him, and he reigned with that many years, and it goes on and on. Well, I don't think any human is living that many years. Although I'm open to the suggestion that somehow they were able to extend their legacies. Maybe these are families or something. But I think the length of these people reigning is questionable, but perhaps the people existed because the Egyptians and Sumerians loved writing things down. Again, this is a superpower to the ancient world. So, is it possible there was a lost civilization? Probably not a whole civilization. A city state? Absolutely. Because when you find a good spot, humans naturally congregate. Animals do it too. Hey, this is a good spot. We got food, we got water, we got shelter, we can keep away from the predators. Humans at this point, they're still throwing spears. There's probably bows and arrows, but at most you're getting a copper sword and maybe a shield. The whole line of weaponry we have today is not even there. But there's this idea in psychology that leaders evolve fairly early on in any civilization. We see this even in the most remote tribes in the Amazon that have never been contacted. Um, they form into tribes and bands and have their own system of leadership. Even when there's a council of elders or something like that, usually they defer to one person who's the most qualified, the most famous or infamous or whatever it is. Freud called this the big man theory. And it's not a big step from there to forming a sedentary lifestyle, especially when agriculture starts coming around. Right now, it looks like humans developed agriculture and didn't settle down until a couple thousand years later. That makes no sense. If you're starting to farm crops and getting a steady source of food, you're probably going to stick there because you want to guard your food. You want to protect it and water it and make sure that it's coming along. You want to harvest it and store it, make it into bread because it's mostly grasses that people are doing, wheat, rye, the basic grains. So the idea that there was an older civilization is very appealing. It answers a lot of questions. And most importantly, you can't deny it. We talked about Psychop the other day. There's no evidence for it. It doesn't exist. No, it means our archaeologists haven't been looking in the right places, especially if they were a pre-stone civilization. I don't say Stone Age, I say pre-stone because copper does not do much to stone. You'd have to get a pretty fragile rock, like sandstone, to be able to do anything with it. Copper's a wonderful metal to work with, and when you can make it into bronze, you got something serious in your hands. But no, this would be relatively primitive, although it might be powerful compared to the tribes around it. And we also know that there were pastoral humans, in other words, the people that looked after the herds. We were domesticating people. It's believed farming came first and then other people became pastoral, but we're domesticating things all at roughly the same point, 12,000, 13,000 years ago. So it seems to me that each branch of humans took what was local to them. If they had sheep that were relatively tame and they could shear them for clothes and eat them for dinner, they became pastoralists. If they found the right grasses, they would mix them and match them and make them into the strains that we know and use today. Organization, I think, develops fast. It's very hard to farm by yourself. I mean, you look at today when you have tractors and stuff like that, yeah, maybe a family can maintain a farm, but we're talking about copper age technology. There's no way to do that. There's no way to physically have that. You have to have groups of people, a whole family, and supporting each other, because a field that doesn't have water in it is useless unless I can strain some water from my neighbor who has a river running through his plantation, and in return maybe I give my neighbor some wine, some barley, something he can't grow himself. And yes, I said he, because while I do believe some civilizations like Ketelhayuk were, I don't want to say female dominated, but females had a much more prominent role than they do at present. The funny part to all these alerts that are going off, they're scammers trying to get a hold of me. So I think I'm gonna call it off for now and go block some people. But yeah, lost civilizations, absolutely 100% believable and plausible. With that, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Silverlight Show. If you did, please like, share, because sharing is caring. Don't forget to click the bell icon down below. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. And we hope you have a fantastic day.